comedian David Boyle, and I'm quitting alcohol. So I have recently started my study of history. I'm going all the way fucking back, baby. Remember those books that I bought for $900? Those rare artifacts, those history books? It was a 12-volume set, a study of history by the historian Arnold J. Toynbee. And I've been wanting to dig into these books for a year now. And I've started it. I've got number 1. It's basically an introduction. It's called The Genesis of Civilizations. Now, what I'm doing to study this is how I'm doing it, because nothing usually sticks with me. I'll read books, but if you ask me what it was about or describe anything that happened, what was the moral? What was the point? Who was the character? What did they do? I fucking draw a blank. And I don't want that to happen with these $900 worth of books. So what I'm doing is I'm fucking going over each chapter with a fine-tooth comb. I'm taking notes by hand, and then I am transferring those notes to the computer. That gives me 3 layers of possible retention. You've got the reading, the writing, and the typing. And I thought, why not add a 4th layer, which would be the podcasting? Now, these books are fucking dense, and they're written by an English historian in like the early 20th century. So like 1925 or something was the first one. Hold on a second. The first one was 1934. So before World War II. But a lot of shit happened in this time. Anyway, the English is dense and verbose, and it's a lot. There's a lot going on. So what I need to do, not just for everyone else, but mainly for myself, I need to understand it and then translate it into dumb. You know what I mean? Otherwise, I'm not remembering fucking lines like, let me just choose a random line. All right, here we go. Certainly such consciousnesses were non-existent as recently as 50 years ago, and even if we attempted to present the history of the West in terms of the constituent parts of these nationalities, in terms, that is, of Czechs or Slovaks or Croats or Serbs, whose history as distinct groups goes further back, the absurdity, while less great in terms of relative age, would be greater in terms of a relative population and territorial extension. Basically there, he's saying, you're not looking at the history of the West through the eyes or through dissecting fucking the history of Serbia. That's basically what he's saying. That's what I'm talking about when I say dumb it down. And that's actually one of the interesting things that I was going to talk about. So it's an introduction and like it's 20 pages in, but he's making the case at the moment. Well, he's trying to set the unit of historical inquiry. I basically verbatimed that. I've remembered that little bit because that is not a Boyle colloquialism. Neither is that, to be fair. But basically what he's trying to set up is that you don't go back and look at history in the unit of the nation, a nation state. And he uses England as a case example. He's like, if you're looking at England, you can't isolate England by itself because there's too many outside factors, and England itself is one of the more isolated places historically in Europe. Like, they are an island, they're off mainland Europe. Also, their politics was different to the rest of Europe, and they also had as big a part as any other country informing the general society of, let's call it the West. He hasn't even brought that up yet. He hasn't made the case for the bigger society, but he includes France and England and Netherlands and all these countries under the one umbrella. So he uses England as a test case to say, if you look at England, you can't talk about the history of England without talking about France and Scandinavia and the Netherlands and surrounding countries. So he breaks down like the key historical events in England's history, which he says was the conversion of the English to Western Christianity. That was fucking way back. Then he said the establishment of the feudal system in the 11th century was another major milestone in English history. The Renaissance, the political, economic, artistic, and intellectual Renaissance around like 1475. Then the Reformation around 1550. Then the expansion overseas. A few of us like to call that colonialism. And then the establishment of responsible parliamentary government around 1675. Basically, what you're talking about there is democracy. And then the most recent one, the establishment of the industrial system of economy, which began around 1775. They're all rough dates. And he says, even when you're looking at those major events in English history, you can't pass it out from the rest of Europe, because the conversion of the English to Western Christianity was basically merging about a half a dozen isolated barbarian communities. So before that, it was just a fucking bunch of barbarians with big fucking leg bones just bashing each other. And then they found Christ. So that was basically the beginning of English history, was the conversion to Western Christianity. Then the feudal system, he said that wasn't just an English idea that was sprouting up before the Norman conquests, and it was stimulated by the Danish invasions and the Scandinavian Volkerongderung, whatever it is. I'm going to have to learn that fucking word. It basically means the Scandinavian migration. Then the Renaissance, he said that was basically cultivated in northern Italy and sprung out from there. Then the Reformation wasn't a solely English thing. It was a movement, a general movement of the time. Also, colonialism, that wasn't an English idea. They actually entered the scene with overseas expansion a little bit late, but they ended up winning it. So that is basically a story of battle between like great powers in Europe, Spain, Netherlands, and all that. So you can't extract England out of that and isolate it without telling the rest of the story. And then the parliamentary system was coming up in France as well. And the industrial system was also coming out around the world, not just England, but they played a major role because of their geographic location and their political system at the time. Anyway, what he's trying to argue is you can't look at a single nation if you're going to study history in its totality. England is just a subset or a substate of a greater whole. And then he gives a couple of examples, like you can't study Venetian history without looking at the sub-societies of the medieval city-states of like northern Italy and Milan and Genoa and Florence. And also when you look at Athenian history, it's a society made up of obviously Athens, Thebes, Corinth, Sparta, all these ancient city-states of Greece. And then he came to a very interesting example on how these individual states in a civilization deal with a simultaneous problem differently, and that causes the rise and fall of these different states within the civilization. So he goes, the members of the city-states of ancient Greece, beginning the period 725 BC to 325 BC, the members of these ancient Greece states were all confronted simultaneously with the problem of population growth on the means of subsistence. So basically, these ancient Greek cities were growing faster than the food could handle. They were getting overpopulated. And at the time, basically all these Hellenic societies were obtaining and raising varied agricultural produce in their territories for home consumption. So when this happened, the different states of ancient Greece dealt with it very differently. So the states of Corinth and Chalix, I don't even know what that is, Chalics. It's the first time I've ever heard of it. So they got rid of their surplus population by seizing and colonizing agricultural territories overseas. Basically colonizing overseas territories like Sicily and southern Italy. Like places where the native population was too fucking sparse and too fucking incompetent to resist. So basically they just took their society and extended it and nothing changed. They just supplanted their way of life onto the new territories. So nothing changed. The character of society, the agriculture, the political conditions never changed. So Sparta had the same problem. They were also under population pressure, and instead of going overseas and taking over weaker countries and just dominating them, they decided to take the territories of their closest neighbor, Messina, who were almost a peer. But the consequence of that was, although they did fulfill their need for additional land, it was constantly under threat. Constant war was breaking out because they decided to take on a close peer at close range. And so to retain their territory, they required a permanent military effort. So in order to meet that, the Spartan society had to militarize, and they changed the texture and life of Sparta completely, and it became a military society from top to bottom. And then Athens was the other one, and they just chilled. They didn't do fucking anything to begin with. Sparta took over Messina. Corinth and Chalix fucking colonized Sicily and southern Italy. Athens did fuck all, so their problem grew bigger and bigger, and eventually they had to come up with something, but the territories had already been done and there was no option for war, so they had to industrialize and begin trade with the other territories. And they created commerce, and the commerce fucking inspired other industries, which also created a new political system within Athens as a side effect of the new industries or commerce or trade that they had developed. And then, yeah, that's about it. That's as far as I got. I don't know if that's worth doing again, but I'm going to continue doing it because I need to be able to talk it out as well. So if you see the history podcast and you're not into it, it's going to be much like this. Just skip it. I know there's a few autistics out there that will enjoy it. Anyway, that was a study of history by Boyle. That'll do for tonight, and I'll see you the fuck later.